Welcome. We are going to talk about the religion timeline in this video. And more and more, I notice that students coming into my class do not have the benefit of knowing how we tell time in history. So I realized a few years ago that I needed to give some kind of an introduction to this. So that's what we're going to do. So anyway, in your files, you have a document that's called religion timeline or just timeline. And you'll need to open that up. It has 2 pages on it. And I'll put myself down here in the corner here. The first page here shows the whole timeline I want to talk about. The second page actually shows a blown up version of the timeline there in talking about the world religions. And we're going to talk about 2 major transitions that have taken place in history. The first one is right here, this big long green area that says the agricultural revolution. This is the advent of domestic agriculture in the Neolithic period. And then, 7,000-8,000 years later, we have another major transition. Now, this one right here is much shorter. It's called the Axial Age there, from about 800 to about 200 BCE. And these are both very important transitions, not to be confused with each other. They're very, very different, but we have to talk about them. So first, let's talk about how we tell time in history. This is a timeline, and all along here, everything is what we call to scale. To scale means, very simply, that, here's a K means 1,000. So from 5,000 to 6,000, that's 1,000 years. And if you look down here, you'll notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 centuries in 1,000 years. As everybody knows, cent is the prefix for 100. That's why you have 100 cents in a dollar. So there are 10 centuries in a millennium. The plural of millennium is millennia. The abbreviation we're going to use is a K, which means 1,000. And now, from about 10,000 BCE to about 100,000 BCE, this is not to scale. And during this whole period, in fact, going back far before 100,000, in Europe, anatomically modern humans probably appeared about 40,000 years ago. But in the Middle East, at least 150,000 years ago. And in Africa, most everybody agrees, 500,000 or so. But all of this is kind of irrelevant, and the reason is that we have no history of these people that is recorded. Everything that we know from archaeology, finding their grave sites or their tool-making sites, this type of thing. So because there is no history, and the reason there's no history, by the way, is because these people are pre-literate. They don't have letters yet. And you can't write something if you don't have letters. Letters are very different than like cave paintings or something like that. Cave paintings, you're trying to make the painting look like what you're talking about. A letter does not look like what it represents. It's an abstract mark. If I happen to write CAT on the board, it might put a picture of a cat in everybody's mind, but there's nothing about the letter CAT that looks at all like a cat. And that's what I mean by abstract marks that communicate. Now, in our language, in English, and in many other languages like Spanish and French and Italian and so on, the letters are phonetic. They tell you how to pronounce words. As you go farther east, of course, the marks that represent different concepts, different actions are not, phonetic at all. There's completely different ways of constructing a language. So in this pre-literate period here, there is no record. So, but the humans up until 10,000 BCE all live in hunter-gatherer societies. They're in smaller family groups. They're nomadic. They're constantly moving around as necessary to find food, whether it's food that is growing or whether they're tracking down animals, hunting to kill them, to eat them. Humans have to go where the food is at. Humans also have to go where they have protection, where they have shelter. And if there are severe weather changes, obviously they're going to have to go somewhere else they can survive. So this whole period here is smaller family groups we call tribes. They're hunting animals, they're gathering food, and they're nomadic. They're moving around. And around 10,000 BCE is when humans start learning to domesticate agriculture. And once we learn how to make the plants grow where we want them to grow, and we learn how to curtail the grazing ranges of the animals, we no longer have to move around all the time. We can start staying in one place, build cities, and this changes everything about human society and culture, but also human religion. So we're going to talk an awful lot about this transition here. The next one we're going to talk about is much, much more recent. Target date would be about 2,500 years ago, from about 2,800 to about 2,200 years ago. And this is a very different period. This is when human beings, for the first time, start conceiving of an ultimate power or an ultimate reality that's beyond the universe, beyond space and time, beyond our ability to even conceive of it. And today, when we think of alternate reality, you don't have to be religious to know what that means. It's a major genre in Hollywood movies and so on, the idea that we may not be seeing reality as it really is. And one immediately thinks of movies like The Matrix, where people think they're living a life and experiencing the joys and the sorrows and everything else, and yet they're really in a pod with wires connected to their brain and intravenous feeding going on. They're living their whole lives out in their own mind. So whether you're religious or not, today everybody understands this idea that there is a reality beyond our perception, or that there may be one at least. And that it may be a more, to be redundant, a more real reality than the one that we are experiencing. Also, in this time, humans radically change the way they think about who they are and their connection to the ultimate. So this is going to be a very, very important discussion. And again, you're going to find out that whether you're religious or not, the way that humans go through this, shall we call it an evolutionary leap, in all the major civilizations around the world during the axial age, and start thinking about alternate realities, start thinking about people having some identity or value beyond who they are in this life. This affects everyone, whether you're religious or not. We'll talk a lot more about that. First of all, let's look at this timeline though. So let's look at this first. We have a line here between BCE and CE. Now, these used to be called BC and AD. BC stood for before Christ, and AD stands for Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord, which is a fancy way of saying after Jesus' birth. So sometimes people think AD means after death, but of course that wouldn't be very sensible. That would mean there was no time during the time that Jesus was alive. So no, it's before Christ, before his birth, and after his birth, or AD in the year of our Lord. Now, we've changed these terminologies lately. Religious groups maybe haven't, but scholars have, and the reason is very simple. You may or may not know this, but there are many, many, many different calendars all over the world. And in any given country, you may have a few different calendars working. So the reason that we have changed the termination on our calendar is our calendar was originally conceived as a Christian calendar, as you can imagine, but now everybody on earth is using it if they're in any way doing business with us or having any kind of negotiations with us, because if we want to get along, there's a couple things we have to agree upon. Number one would be what day it is. And in terms of business, we have to agree what a dollar's worth, or a yen is worth. And so obviously, the whole idea of comparing different currencies of different countries to each other is might be something that some of you are interested in getting involved with. But because the whole world is using our calendar, we need to be kind. It's not nice to tell a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Taoist or a Confucianist that we're living in the year 2020, in the year of our Lord, because this man, Jesus of Nazareth, is not their Lord. Their religion is not based on his teachings, however much they might admire it. And so it's just being courteous that we've changed this. It's not a satanic scheme to get Jesus out of the calendar. And by the way, remember that little line, because I'll ask you that to see if you've actually watched the video. It's not a satanic scheme to get Jesus out of the calendar. Why are we doing it? To be nice to people who aren't Christians. So what if we change these terms to? BCE means before the Common Era. Hopefully you can see this little red cursor here. Actually, it's more like a laser pointer. Before the Common Era. So that's easy because BC, BCE, almost the same thing. AD and CE, a little different. CE means Common Era. Why is it the Common Era? Because we're all using the same calendar, and this is the era that we're all in, using this calendar. We're calculating the same way. I personally don't care what you say. I'm not sensitive if you say we're 2020 AD or 2020 CE. It makes no difference whatsoever to me. But again, this is why the terminology has been changed. Anyway, why this break right here? You'll notice that this is 2020 years before present. If you look here where it says 2K, this would be 2000 years AD or 2000 years CE. And at the time of making this video, we're in the year 2020. So it is 20 years past the 2000 year mark. And you can see there's just a little bit of area there I have, to the right side of the 2K that, should indicate 20 years or whatever. So we are 2020 years past this arbitrary dividing line. Where'd the dividing line come from? Well, in the Roman Empire, when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, the calendar is reconstrued to have year 1 supposedly on the year that Jesus was born, year 1 CE or year 1 AD. Now, there's a problem with this we'll talk about later when we get to Christianity, because Jesus wasn't born in the year 1. He was probably born somewhere between 8 and 5 BCE. But it doesn't matter. This is the arbitrary point that those who constructed the calendar chose. So we're 2020 years past this mark. Now, everything before this mark we call BCE. And as we go backwards in time, you'll notice the numbers get bigger. Here's 500 years, here's 1,000 years, here's 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000 years. This means right here, 4,000 years before this change from BCE to CE. So the first thing I want you to get is this. If you're talking about the date 4000 BCE, and now let's talk about the date we're in, 2020 CE. How many years are in between those two dates, between 4000 BCE and 2020 CE? Well, it's simple math. Just add 4000 and 2020. It's 6020 years. 2020 on this side of the line and 4000 on this side of the line. That should make great sense. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is we need to talk about how we think about time in terms of centuries. The easiest way to start this is to talk about birthdays. And in class, this might be the first question that I ask a lot of times. And sometimes people get it, and a lot of times people don't. And I'll take someone in the class and I'll ask, what's your name? And so let's say we ask somebody in the class whose name is Seymour. Anybody know someone named Seymour? I don't. If you've ever seen the movie with Rick Moranis, there's a song in there, in The Little Shop of Horrors, there's a song in there where his girlfriend is singing, "Suddenly Seymour is standing beside me." And but I don't know anybody named Seymour, I never have. Or Poindexter. Anyway, so Seymour or Poindexter, I'll ask, "How old are you?" And Seymour will say, "Oh, I'm 21. And so then I will ask the class, in what year of his life is Seymour? And they'll usually say, "Oh, his 21st year." And occasionally someone will get it right and they'll say he's in his 22nd year of life. Now, if he's 21 years old, how is it he's in his 22nd year of life? Well, think about this for a second. What century are we in? Everybody knows it's the 21st century. But look at the date. It starts with a 20. 20 is 20, not 21. So how is it that we're in the 21st century? It's the same way that Seymour, although he's 21, is in the 22nd year of his life. What happened is this. When Seymour turned 21, he had a birthday. And, probably they made him a birthday cake with 21 candles on it. That is, if anybody loves Seymour or is celebrating his existence. But let's assume that he has friends. So they give him a cake with 21 candles on it. What are they celebrating? They're celebrating the fact that Seymour has survived a full 21 years. And once he has survived a full 21 years, the evidence of that, his prize, if you will, is that his official age changes to the number of full years he has survived. So once he's survived the 21st year fully, now his age becomes 21. But as soon as you change his age to 21, he's now in his 22nd year of life. And 365 days from now, or from whenever his birthday is, if he has survived, and if people still love him, they'll probably give him a cake with 22 candles, celebrating that he's finished the 22nd year of his life, and he's now starting the 23rd. Makes sense, right? I mean, have you ever seen a woman with a young baby, say in a stroller, and the baby is 6 months old, and you ask the woman, "Oh, how old is your little boy?" And she goes, "Oh, he's 0. Says nobody ever. We have enough common sense to know that you just don't do that, but sometimes we haven't thought it through. Once we get past the first couple years, then we just kind of forget. It's almost like people think that they're the same age for 365 days and then their age changes. And of course, that's ridiculous. I'm 30 days older than I was 30 days ago. I'm not the same age. Now, you have to think the same way with centuries. So we talked about completing years. What's a century? A century is 100 years, right? So when we completed the 20th century, the whole time we're in the 20th century, what are the first two numbers of the date? 19. Because the 19th century was the last completed century. And we started the 20th century. And so the whole time we've got 19s in front of our dates, we're working on the 20th century. And as soon as we finish the 20th century, our reward, if you will, is we get to change the first two digits of the date to 20, saying this is the last full century we've completed. So once we hit that 20, we're in the 21st century. And we're going to be working on that for another 100 years. And at the end of the 100 years, if we haven't blown ourselves up or aliens haven't abducted us or whatever, then we will change the date to 21, something, something, and we will say we're in the 22nd century. Easy enough, right? Some people haven't thought about this before. Now, this is why this is important, okay? Let's go to the calendar here, and you can see my little laser pointer. So let's start with year 1. By the way, let me just say there's no year 0. There can't be an absence of time. If you've ever looked at Roman numerals, there's no 0. Okay, so dates never have zeros in them. And when we use zeros in dates, we don't use it to mean nothing. We simply use it to mean that the 1 is multiplied by 10. So there's no zeros. The date goes from 1 BCE to 1 CE. So let's start in 1 CE, and let's talk about the first century. Now, we know a century is 100 years, right? So if we have the first century, what's the first year in the first century? No brainer. It's year 1, right? So what is the 100th year later? That would be year 100, right? So the first century goes from year 1 to year 100. What about the second century? Well, the second century starts with the year 101, right? And it goes another 100 years. So what is the last year in the second century? It's 200. See, when the second century is fully completed, we get to make that first digit a 2. And we start the third century. So when we get to 299, we're almost done with the third century. Just got one more year to go. And when we finish that year, we change the beginning digit of the date to a 3 because we have fully completed 3 100-year periods called centuries. And as soon as we hit 300, we are beginning what? The 4th century. Now, it's important to think this way. And some people have just never been exposed to this. It's kind of strange, but it's not your fault. But the K through 12 school system, most places today, is not what it was when I went to school. But then again, I'm really, really old. So how many years, this is your first question, how many years in the 3rd century CE begin with the digit 3? How many years begin with the digit 3? The answer is 1 year, the very last one. Because the 3rd century is from 201 to 300. And remember, when we get to 300, we're changing the first digit to a 3 in recognition of the fact that we have finished the 3rd century. So let's just, for the sake of conversation, say there's a point where we've just finished the 3rd century and we're marking that, and we haven't, haven't breathed the first second in the 4th century, as it were. But at that time, you have a year in the 3rd century that starts with 3. There's only one. It's the last year in the 3rd century. So if you took the 7th century CE, how many years in the 7th century begin with the digit 7? Answer, 1, the last year, because the 7th century is from 601 to 700. Make sense? Now, if I'm talking about the middle 7th century, pick a date in the middle 7th century. How about 650? That's about as middle as you can get. 650 is mid 7th century. If I said pick a date in the early 7th century, you might say 610. 610 is early in the 7th century. It's only 10 years of the 100 that have to be completed. If I said pick a date very, very late in the 7th century, you would pick a date 698, 699, something like that. Very late in the 7th century. Make sense? So early 7th century, you could say 601, 610, mid 7th century, 640 to 660, late 7th century, you'd say 690, and about as late as you can go is like 699, where you're turning 700, because at that point you're finishing the 7th century and you're beginning the 8th century. Make sense? So we are in the 21st century now. We're still in the early 21st century because we're only, at the time of this video anyway, we're only 20 years through it. We're 1/5 of the way through it. So I think we could still call it early in the 21st century. Now let's talk about millennia. A millennium is 1,000 years. So when we talk about completing 20 centuries, that's 20 groups of 100. 20 times 100 is 2,000. How many millennia are in 2,000 years? Answer, 2, because a millennia is 1,000 years, right? 2 times 1,000 is 2,000. So when we hit the year 2000, we were not only finishing the 20th century, we were finishing the 2nd millennium CE. Make sense? So now, what millennium are we in? We're obviously in the 3rd millennium CE. Are we early or late? Obviously, we're very early. 20 years out of 1,000 is very early indeed. Make sense? Now, here's where it's going to get a little bit tricky. Okay? When we go to BCE, all of these numbers are arbitrarily projected backwards, getting greater as you go farther backwards. Obviously, nobody used these dates. Take the famous King David in the kingdom of Israel, later called Judah. He came to the throne right about 1000 here, where I've got my little cursor. So, again, this is going to be a little over 3,000 years before present, because 2,000 and 1,000 is 3,000. Okay? Of course, he doesn't know it's the year 1000. These are all arbitrary dates that are projected backwards. They have their own calendar, and he has a completely different way of calculating what year it is. He certainly isn't going, oh, it's 1000 BCE, only 1000 years until Jesus comes. Said nobody. So these are all arbitrary numbers attached to years. The important thing to remember is while the numbers are getting bigger while they're going backwards, time never goes backwards. We're not splitting time and telling time to go backwards here. We don't have the power to do that. We're just making the numbers get bigger as we go back. So if David comes to the throne in 1000 BCE here, and that's the first year of his reign, what is the second year of his reign? 99. And the third is 98. And then 97, and then 96, and then 95, because the numbers are getting smaller as we get to this line between BCE and CE. That makes sense? Now, let's talk about centuries again. Let's talk about the 1st century BCE. Now remember, the 1st century CE was from 1 to 100, right? Simple enough. So you might think the 1st century BCE is also from 1 to 100, but no, if that was the case, time would be going backwards. Time is always going from left to right. So if you have the 1st century, and here's the year 1, and right over here is the year 100, and time is going to the right, then you're going 100, 99, 98, 97. So it's backwards. The first year of the first century CE is 100. The last year of the first century CE is 1, because they're going backwards. Now, let's jump over to, say, the 3rd century BCE. The 3rd century BCE, okay, we've got from 100 to 1, that's the first. We've got from 200 to 101, that's the second. We've got from 300 to 201, that's the 3rd century BCE. So it begins with 300 and it ends with 201. Make sense? Now, first thing I want you to get is there is a similarity, even though it's backwards, and that is there is only 1 year in the 3rd century BCE that starts with a 3. And that's the very first year, 300. After that, we go to 299. Now remember, CE over here, if you're watching my little laser pointer thing there, it is the last year of the century that bears the number of the century. BCE, it is the first year of the 100 years in the century that bears the number of the century. Make sense? So when David comes to the throne 1000 BCE, 1,000 years is 10 centuries, right? So if you're talking about the century, okay, he is in what century? He's in the 10th century. And the 10th century goes from 1000 to 901. So if he comes to reign in 1000, it's right at the beginning of the 10th century. And around 950 or so is when his son Solomon comes to reign. We would say that Solomon comes to reign in the middle 10th century. 950, middle 10th century. Just like 950 would be middle 10th century in the CE, no difference. However, when we talk about early or late in the 10th century, it's backwards. Over here, the 10th century is from 901 to 1000. So 903, say, CE would be early in the 10th century. However, in BCE, okay, we're going, again, from 1000 to 900. So 903 is not early in the 10th century. 903 is very, very late in the 10th century BCE. Because again, we're going from 1000 to 901. When you get to 903, you're only 2 years before the end of the century. That's late. An early date in the 10th century BCE would be something like, what? 995, 990? That's early. So it's backwards. And BCE you might have to think about a little bit because, first of all, the numbers are going backwards. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated. And also, remember, when we're talking about the 10th century, every year in the 10th century starts with a 9, except for the first one, which has that 10. Has all of the other ones are 3-digit years. This one has 4 digits, 1, 0, 10. Okay, so you might have to think about it a little bit. It will click at some point. Now, just to ask yourself if you've got it, think of a date in the late 7th century BCE. Late 7th century BCE. What might you come up with? How about something like 605? That is very, very late in the 7th century. What if I was going to pick a date early in the 7th century BCE? How about 690? That's early in the 7th century. And so 80 years later, we get to 610, and now we're late in the 7th century. That makes sense? And again, it works the same way for millennia. So let's talk about Abraham. Abraham is born somewhere around 2000 BCE, give or take a couple hundred years. We can't date it precisely. So let's just use 2000 BCE as a date. So he is born, Abraham is born at the very beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE. Second millennium going from 2000 to 1001. He's born at the very beginning of it. He's also born at the very beginning of the 20th century BCE, if that's the case. So the beginning of the 20th century and the beginning of the second millennium are the exact same thing, BCE. Make sense? Starting the 2nd millennium, and we're starting the 2nd century. Now, again, this is completely backwards of CE because CE, we're finishing the 20th century at the same time we're finishing the 2nd millennium. So anyway, if you've never thought about that before, you might have to think about it a little bit. it's funny because children that are like 6, 7 years old, I've known children 6, 7 that are learning like multiple languages at one time effortlessly, because that's the formative age for learning any kind of language, any kind of abstract reasoning, something like that. Kind of like learning music. I mean, I know kids that 5, 6 years old, they learn how to play 8 or 10 different instruments, and they go on to be amazing musicians. Some people don't. And they get 18, 20 years old and they think, hey, I'd like to learn how to play guitar or piano. And they find out it's very, very challenging indeed. And the funny thing was, if they picked up the guitar, started beating on the piano at 5 years old, they would have mastered it much more easily. It's a formative age. And this is the same kind of thing. If you'd been taught this in grade school, it probably wouldn't have been a problem. But if you're now a sophomore in college, assuming you didn't waste any time, you're probably around 20, and some of you might be older. And if you've never thought like this, you might have to think about it for a while. You might have to stare at this timeline for it to click, okay? But you've got to do what you've got to do. If you don't understand this, it is going to be a detriment to you in any history course, humanities course, anything where dates matter, and you need to understand the sequence of events and be able to tell people when they happened. You're going to have to be able to tell time this way. Alrighty, so again, the reason that we did this is because we are going to talk about, in the next 2 videos, these 2 major transitions. Now, the first one is the agricultural revolution here from 10,000 to 6,500. It's a very long period of time. Why? Well, there's 2 reasons. Number 1, the agricultural revolution starts at different times in different places around the world. When we say 10,000 BCE or 12,000 years ago, 12,000 years before present or BP, the agricultural revolution is happening in the area, well, that is today Iraq, in the area that is today Israel. We can demonstrate domestic farming going back that far. But in America, where I happen to be right now, it's usually estimated that the beginning of the domestication of agriculture, or the advent, if you will, of domestic agriculture, is probably more like around 6,500 BCE. Now, the second reason this is really, really long line is because when we talk about domesticating agriculture, again, that means humans are learning how to make the crops grow where they want them to grow, and how to make the animals be where they need them to be, curtail their grazing range whatsoever. They do not learn that in 3 or 4 days. They don't learn that in 300 or 400 years. It takes them thousands of years to gradually learn the things that they need to know to be successful in domesticating agriculture. And of course, they're learning exactly what kind of places are going to work for them to settle down and be sedentary. That means stay in one place. You need a place with fertile soil. You need a place with a water supply. You're probably going to have to use irrigation to move that water supply through your crops. Ideally, it would be a place also where you could defend yourself. But sometimes when you find the fertile ground and the water source, it's not as defensible as you'd like it to be. So you're going to build a city with big walls around it. Anyway, all of this progress towards little hunter-gatherer families to big walled cities with vocational diversity, that doesn't happen, from 11 to 12 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. That happens over centuries. So that is why, or millennia. And so that's why this period is so long. It takes a while. Now, the axial age is a much shorter period. And again, we're talking much later. If you look at this period right here, sometimes when we want to talk about a long period, what we can do to make it really easy is we can talk about a target date. Okay? Target, you're just picking a nice round date in the middle of it just to talk about. So in this, we're going from 10,000 to 6,500. Okay? So while 8K is not exactly in the middle of it, it's a nice round number that we could use for a target date. Why doesn't it have to be exact? Because the whole period is guesstimated anyway, to use that word, okay? These are not precise dates like exactly 12,000 years ago. Somebody said, hey, what if I put a seed here? They're approximate dates, or we call them circa dates. Have you ever seen like a little C period in front of a date? It means circa. If you speak Spanish, it's the same thing as cerca. It means in proximity to, close to. So C is a way of saying approximately. So we can just say target date 8,000, okay? Now, let's go to the axial age here. And this is, as I said before, from 800 BCE to 200 BCE. How many years is that? 600. 800 minus 200 is 600. Very simple math, so don't let it give you a headache. Now, between 800 and 200, what's the middle date? 500. So 500 BCE is a great target date for the axial age. So if you take the target date of the agricultural revolution, which is 8,000, and you take the target date of the axial age, which is 500, how many years are in between those two dates? And the answer is simple. You take 8,000, subtract 500, and what do you get? 7,500. So 7,500 years between the target dates of these two transformations, if you will. So don't get them confused. They're very, very far apart. In fact, 7,500 years is longer than conservative Christians and Jews think the earth has even been around. They think we're like getting ready to hit 6,000 years. And I'm not making any statement on that right now, but I'm just saying 7,500 years is a long time. It's very important you understand this. So if you've never thought about history before, the chart may help you. I mean, you can literally see all of these little marks here, and you can go, oh, you know, here's 8,000. There's 100 years, 200, 300, 400, 500. I mean, and whoa, 7,500 years later, now you're in the middle of the axial age. That's a long time. So try not to confuse these different descriptions that you're going to get of what happens. And again, if you're not used to thinking about history and separating things in your mind, you may get these events confused. You can stare at this timeline if you want. In fact, you may want to kind of have it with you as we talk about different historical progressions so that you can look at it. And kind of like if I say, well, you know, from Abraham, and boom, in your mind, you see this little, you know, to David, boom, and in your mind, you see it right here. And so, okay, this is 1,000 years, okay? And then from David to Jesus, and in your mind, you go, oh, boom, right here, supposedly year one, close enough, another 1,000 years. And so, looking at the chart, since we can calculate the distance across a page from left to right, so maybe that helps if you haven't been used to thinking about how long periods are, how long of a time period is in between two different dates. That's about all we're going to talk about here. However, on the very next page, I will just introduce this to you because it's going to be important when we get to the axial age, okay? On the very next page, I have taken the right side of this timeline and I've blown it up. Let me just kind of try to move my little recording thing out of the way here. And oops, we have ended the slideshow. That's not good. Let's try this again. There we go. And again, so let's go to the second slide. And the reason that this is important is because you are seeing all of the major world religions today. Now, there's some newer ones. I mean, you'll see at the bottom of the list here where I've got Baha'i and LDS, and by the 14th century, we're dealing with Sikhism. But we don't have enough time to talk about all the new religious movements, obviously, but I have included three of, these are definitely worthy to be called world religions, even though Baha'i and LDS haven't been around that long. They've multiplied like crazy and spread all over the world. We're going to be looking mainly again at the Indus Valley civilization. By the way, Indus, it's the name of a river. And so we gave a geographical term to the land. We called it India. And here I have inadvertently ended the slideshow again. Let's try this one more time. We call it India. And so what do we call the people? We call them Indi. What do we call the religion? We call it Hinduism. That little H on the beginning doesn't mean much. So when you say Hinduism, what you're really saying is Indianism. It's a geographical term. It's like saying Floridianism or, American Statesianism, Americanism. So there are different periods here, but one of the things that you can see looking at Hinduism is the oldest historical religion on earth. In fact, the reason we have this faded in line here right around 3K, this is, by the way, about 3K to 3,500 is when we really have the foundations of the great ancient civilizations beginning. So somewhere around in here, we're going to assume that this civilization was born, but we don't know, because we don't have historical records of this civilization that we can understand going back that far. So that's why we have the faded in line. What's interesting is this religion starts before the axial age here, as you can see. And almost all of the other world religions are born either in the axial age, I'm not sure why this keeps doing this, are either born in the axial age or they're born after it. In fact, you'll see Christianity is born after it, Islam is born after it, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, all born in the axial age. In Greece, the major philosophical schools that we think about today as being foundational, Platonism, Stoicism, Aristotelianism, Epicureanism, all of these are born in the axial age. This is an incredible period that's very interesting to talk about. But you'll notice here there's one other religion that's around before the axial age, and guess what it is? It's Judaism. Now we have different periods in here, and we're going to talk about them later, not right now. The difference with Judaism, as you notice, there's no fade in. There's a hard line there, and that line is the birth of this guy named Abraham. And we call this the patriarchal period. That's what that little abbreviation there means, by the way. Patriarchal period. I'm not sure why this thing keeps ending on me. And then we have a period about 600 years after Abraham where his descendants have become a great nation called Israel. We call this Israelite religion. We have a devastation by the Babylonians where everybody is taken captive to Babylon and the temple's destroyed. And when Persia takes over Babylon, King Cyrus of Persia likes the Jews, tells them they can all go home. And so they go home and they rebuild their temple, and we call this Second Temple Judaism. And Judah is actually one of the 12 tribes of Israel, but this is the predominant, what's left of the Israelites. And we'll talk more about this later. Today, we have a period we're in called Rabbinic Judaism because 70 CE, the Romans destroyed this Second Temple. And now the priests no longer lead Judaism. I mean, since then, for over 1900 years, Judaism has now been led by the rabbis. And we'll talk later about the differences in their functions, in terms of what the difference between priests and rabbis are and so on when we get to our discussion about the axial age. Now, Christianity, of course, even if we were right that Jesus was born in the year 1, since the axial age ends in 200 BCE, that would mean Jesus is born 200 years after the axial age period ends. And probably doesn't start his preaching until he's about 30, so that's about 230 years later there. Islam is later than that. Islam begins in the early 7th century, 610. You could talk about as the date that Muhammad first receives a revelation from God brought by the angel Gabriel. However, Christianity and Islam, we can still call them axial age religions because they're built on the same principles. We haven't had another axial age since then. We still think in the same kind of terms as far as what ultimate reality is, what we can know, what we can't know. And who knows, maybe we're due for another axial age sometime soon. Some scholars think so. Every now and then I'll have a student that'll say, what do you think the next axial age will be like? To which I respond, if I had any idea what it would be like, we'd already be there. So, just to preview, the two religions that are around before the axial age are Hinduism and Judaism, and guess what happens in the axial age? They change radically as well. So, that's all for this one. I will see you for the next one. The next one we're going to talk about, to go back here, we're going to talk about the agricultural revolution. And so for a lot of people, if you've never thought about this before, you may have to stare at the chart and think about it. It will click. Just don't give up. Just do what you got to do, because you really need to be able to use this language of history to talk about the duration of time and when things happen. Sound good? All right. I'll see you for the next video.